Welcome back, and thanks for joining us in another Tales from the Field. In this video series, we talk about your farming stories. So if you have a cool story, let me know down in the comments. But with that out of the way, let's get into our first story. Our first comment comes from Sherry Candy, 1792, who states, "My dad was in the group of young engineers that Merlin Hansen had working to develop the new generation tractors. Most of those design engineers grew up on farms in Illinois, Montana, Iowa, Colorado, and Oklahoma. Practical knowledge of farming is what was needed, as they are the reasons why these tractors revolutionized agriculture." Thank you for the comment and telling the cool story, and I think a lot of people can agree that these tractors were not only a step forward for John Deere, but for all agriculture in general, setting the bar on what tractors could be and what the future would bring. The next story also ties in to the John Deere development team. DeerNut00 writes, "My father was hired onto the John Deere Waterloo factory as an experimental engineer in 1936. He was on the Model R team and stayed with that team during its design, development, testing, and production. As a kid, born in 1939, I heard many of the developing stories of testing and experimenting with the different fuel injection pumps and companies such as Rusamaster and Stanadyne. Father was not one to talk much, but one interesting test was at a sheep farm northeast side of Waterloo. The Model R was buried in a sand pit lined with railroad ties on the side and overhead. The test was to find out at what RPM the engine would tolerate before it exploded. Fed with the controls to run the RPM higher and higher, it finally erupted and blew its cave apart. Dad was told many times in those 13 years before production that Deere would never make a diesel tractor to sell. The R holds a soft part in my heart. Thank you for the video and the history on the Model R. This is a very cool comment, and thank you for sharing. Even though the Model R would take over a decade to complete, this step for John Deere getting them into the diesel tractor market would be huge. The Model R is also a big reason why we'd end up seeing John Deere two-cylinder tractors produced after the A's and B's. Deere's president at the time, C.D. Wyman, wanted to scrap the two-cylinders and move on to multi-cylinder engines. L.A. Duke Rowland was in charge of tractor production, and after spending millions of dollars developing the R, he felt that the project couldn't be scrapped. He also felt that Deere needed more time to develop these multi-cylinder engine tractors, and that's why we'd see the two-cylinder tractors for 10 more years, eventually being replaced by the new generation multi-cylinder engine tractors in 1960. For our next story, we're going to be heading down south to Darrell 7407. He writes, "I have a 70 LP. They were popular in the South because butane, as we called it, was cheap and plentiful. Another plus was that it couldn't be stolen and used for cars like gasoline. In the Mid-South, we refer to a 5-gallon can and a siphon hose as a moonlight credit card, and stealing gas happened all the time. The 70 was a really good tractor, but I'm glad I don't have to farm with one now." It is interesting to note that over 6,200 of the 35,000 total 70s built were propane models. Our next comment comes from Michael Cochran, 7895, who writes, "Dad bought a brand new 4640 in 1979. He still has it and uses it to pull his 12-row planter. It has over 12,000 hours and he's never touched the engine for repairs. He refers to it as Old Faithful." Our next comment is in reference to the 4520 John Deere. Bruce writes, "I had one for the last 30 years. It was my main tractor for me, along with a 4430. I had the 4520 engine overhauled a couple years back. I don't use it for much now, but I still have the 5-bottom plow I used to pull. It might make a few plow days in my retirement." That's going to do her for today's Tales from the Field. If you have a cool story, let me know down in the comments, and it just might make the next video. With that out of the way, I want to thank you guys for watching. We'll catch you in the next video.